Welcome everyone to Gukesh taking on Anish Giri in the tie breaks of Tata Steel Chess. This is for the battle of the first place. It's the semi-finals. D4 by Gukesh. Knight comes out and we're going to witness perhaps the London system. No, E3 played. Anish quickly puts his bishop out to F5. This is 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment and we are seeing the main line of Slav defense now. Gukesh takes the bishop. He has the bishop pair now. This is quite a good, interesting position. Meanwhile, black is very solid, and if you look at all his pieces, they are well developed. Rook comes to c8. Anish moving very quickly and is well prepared, but Gukesh takes his time. He takes on d5, and Anish takes back with the c pawn. Interesting decision. He could have also taken back here with the e pawn, but taking with the c pawn is correct. The queens are now placed against each other for the trade. Black would want white to take perhaps on b6, while white would be happy with black taking so that his rook can open up on the a file. Now Anish taking a bit of time here because there are many possibilities. He can develop his bishop here, he can take the queen, he can also play a6 if needed. He plays a6, just taking control of the b5 square. Now of course this position is quite very stable and so on, but it can get quite sharp. King e2, what a move, connecting the rooks. Gukesh does not castle, he thinks his king is better placed in the center. Bishop d6 does put a pressure on the h2 pawn, but the pawn is pushed forward now. We can see Anish being very calm, cool and collected here. He has 2 minutes 40 seconds on the clock. He now takes the queen. Pawn takes, and a very interesting move could be g5, which is what I think he wants to play. But imagine if Gukesh gets knight a4, b4, knight c5. He would be then pressing. So in a way Anish has to do something, and that's why he plays e5, which is a nice little move here. E5. Maybe Gukesh has g4 ideas now, which is possible to play. But Anish is very clear that yes, I'm taking on the isolated pawn, but I feel the play would be sufficient to compensate for it. Knight takes, and now he wants to take this bishop here. Gukesh brings his rook to d1, and I like how he's reorganizing his pieces. Anish can take the bishop, but he castles instead. Bishop e1, nice little move, because with this what he's doing is he's starting to put pressure on the d5 pawn already with the rook here. The bishop has moved out of the way. It is right now not doing much, but later with f3 can become active on the other diagonal. The king comes to f1. Gukesh wants to preserve his bishop via e2, but if you take it, then after rook takes, the other rook comes here and there's pressure on the d5 pawn. So taking also doesn't look like a great idea. Anish needs to be careful about how he's going to make progress here. He's going to take the bishop, I think. It's the safest thing to do. He's thinking. He's not sure. But he has time on the clock. Both players have roughly 2 minutes here. So it is fine. Meanwhile, you can see a huge group of spectators joining in. Of course, Anish is the local lad here, and you can see from Anish's time consumption that he thinks this is the critical moment. Knight goes back to c6. His idea now is to put the knight on b4, where it will attack the bishop, also defend the pawn, and I think that's a very dangerous idea because it gives white the bishop pair to play with, but on the other hand it's also quite ambitious. Gukesh deciding now what to do. One plan is to play bishop e2 to f3 to put pressure on this way on the pawn. And you can see the focus of Gukesh is just so intense. He plays knight e2 and bishop comes out to e5. Bishop c3 played, offering a trade. Anish trades it and Gukesh's pawn structure is improved. But on the other hand, you will realize that this pawn now becomes a weakness on the open file. So even though the pawns have been undoubled, they can become weaknesses. h4 is a very cool move here, sort of clamping down on these pawns, but Gukesh goes f3 and that gives Anish the time to push g5. This is typical chess. improving his position with g5, g6, creating space for his king and other pieces. How should Gukesh continue? You know, his knight really wants to get to the d4 square, but his knight is right now overloaded in defending this pawn on c3. So all in all, it's visually looking nice for white, but actually it is not so cool. Gukesh now down to a minute on the clock. King comes up to e7. Pawn pushes forward. The knight moves to e5. Now the knight can settle down on c4 square, can also take the bishop. Bishop comes to c2. And the rook moves to d6. The bishop comes out to b3. There is a lot of pressure here with the bishop, rook, and knight d7. Oh, he was almost going to play his rook d3, but then he came back. Now the knight comes to b6. You can see how Anish is maneuvering his knights to defend the pawn on d5. Also looking at this weakness on the c4 square with his knight. And also the knight on e2 is kind of locked up to the c3 pawn as we just discussed. So Anish is ready to now sort of repeat. And I think a draw seems like the most logical outcome of this. But you always know Gukesh is a big fighter. He goes rook h1. He wants to create play with h4. And I think in this, Anish will get his chances. You can sense Anish playing his opponent, not the position per se. He goes knight c4. He puts his knight on this square. You can take the knight, but then you can also have to deal with pawn takes. There's also rook takes. Rook comes up to d4. Are there some tactics in the air? Anish has a good solid minute on the clock. Gukesh is down to 30 seconds. What is Anish going to play next? He brings his knight back to d6. The rook comes to c1. And now the knight moves into the c4 square. Gukesh has the question whether to take the knight or not. He's waiting. He's waiting. I think a repetition is incoming. Will Gukesh play rook d3 again and repeat? He's down to 26 seconds. In fact, he's also now down to less than 20 seconds. Maybe it's good to repeat. No, he doesn't repeat. He wants to play on. What fighting spirit shown by Gukesh here. He just wants to continue playing. But Anish's position is completely fine. He's so solid and he's so good at this. Rook c7 goes back. Waiting. King comes to e1. He wants to use his king to defend the pawn here, which is the weakness on c3. b6 played, trying to create a passer. And now the king comes in. The passer is created. Black might suddenly start taking over. Gukesh has to be careful. Look at his time. He's down to 15 seconds. Knight comes here. b5. Knight is coming to b5. Maybe Gukesh has just got what he wanted. Careful not to move your king here. There could be a nasty fork coming in. What is Anish going to play? He pushes his pawn to a4, but now all of a sudden Gukesh is better. Gukesh's knight on b5 is a monster and his decision to play on seems to have been validated. Anish's position doesn't look that great. He tries to bring his king over to c6. Pawn push to e4, making use of the pin. King comes up. There's a check that can be given. The king goes back to b7 and maybe now going back here or pushing the pawn forward. He pushes it. Knight h5 and now knight b5. What a play by Gukesh. A fork coming in here and Anish is now in big trouble. Knight c6. Let's go with the knight to d6. You can see Gukesh knows this is his chance. He's attacked the rook and the pawn. Rook c7. b5 check. King c5 looks like the only move. And now rook a d1. Trying to attack here on the d5 square. Seems logical. He plays rook a d1. Knight comes in. Rook goes to d4. No, he had to go to d2. So that if f6 there was g3 but fe5. f6. Brilliant move found here by Anish Giri. Blunder by Gukesh. fe5. And in a second the game is over. Because now with the knight coming back, the knight was trapped and he has won a piece. With low time, it was Anish who managed to create this trappy play and Gukesh has lost this. Whoa! Anish Giri showing his nerves of steel and also against the youngsters, he's able to match move for move in blitz chess. Of course, one of the finest players in the world right now is Anish and it seems like He has won. Yes, Gukesh resigns. Anish takes the lead in this finals, which means that Gukesh is in a must-win. He looks at the other board between Abdusattorov and Wei, which has just ended in a draw. The arbiters come and replace the name panels. It will be Gukesh who now will have the black pieces and Anish who will have the white pieces. That is actually a good news for Anish Giri because he just needs a draw in order to proceed to the finals to play against the winner of Nodirbek and Wei. Gukesh comes in. How to play for a win against a player like Anish Giri is the big question here. It's not at all easy. Anish will have his solid opening with white pieces, but Gukesh sits down. He is a man who loves a challenge. So there we have it. Again, 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. The arbiter in the background is ready. The spectators are ready. Handshake and off we go. D4 by Anish. Knight f6, c4, e6, and Anish playing the main line stuff because generally it's a good idea to play mainline theory in such moments as that will lead to knight c6, well-known positions, but Gukesh is not going for well-known. He goes knight c6, and with that he's ready to take on inferior position against Anish just to bring him out of his prep. g6. Taking too many risks here is Gukesh, but then that's how you play with black in blitz if you want to play for a win. Gukesh, I think, has mastered that art of playing for a win, but let's see if he's able to do it against a very strong player like Anish Giri. b3 played, and Anish being so solid here, just ensuring that nothing really, is played loosely here. He knows he has the match in the bag. He has won with the black pieces, which is always very tough. And you can see the bishop on c8 is not so well placed. Queen e7 played. This is a nice move because the idea is to take on c4 and then put your rook on d8 and put pressure on the d4 pawn. That is Gukesh's idea. But Anish can actually play bishop b2 and then pushes pawn to e3, queen to c2, rook to d1, rook to c1. That seems like the stable way to continue. He goes bishop g5. Now this move slightly weird, but I can understand what his aim is. He wants to put pressure on the d5 pawn. So if h6 is played, then you take, and then after queen takes, you want to take on d5. That's his idea. So Gukesh actually takes on c4, pawn takes back, and now brings his rook here with some ideas of taking and making use of this pin. So Anish has to remain solid. Maybe pushing the pawn to e3 makes a lot of sense here. Yes, e3 played. h6, take, and now Gukesh, some pieces fall off here. Gukesh has the bishop pair, but if you see white's pieces, they are picture of coordination. Rook can come here, put pressure here, bishop can come here. Anish plays queen c2. Gukesh brings his bishop back, rook b1. Fine play here. a5, interesting. He wants to get his knight to b4. That's his plan. But right now, it doesn't make so much sense because a3 will kick the knight off later. So rook b8 played. And maybe Gukesh is angling for b6, bishop a6, and just trying to solidify his position. But knight b5, not a good move by Anish Giri. The reason for that is that now the knight no longer looks at the d5 square, and black can play e5. Yes, he's pushed his pawn to e5. Good move by Gukesh there. And now what does Anish do? Because if he takes on e5, suddenly his c4 pawn is isolated. Also, the bishop is ready to move out to f5 or g4. So good position for Gukesh. Knight comes to b4. Queen e2 has to do something. Quite soon a3 will kick the knight away. So what is Gukesh's next idea? But actually it's not so bad even if the knight is kicked, because knight can go back to a6 to c5. He plays his pawn to c6. And for Anish, has to remain careful. He must bring his knight back to c3. Anish down to 1 minute 50 seconds. So is Gukesh. Both players have kind of equal time on the clock. Knight c3 played, defending the d5 pawn. Good chess. You can push your pawn to e4, but the knight will just settle down on the d4 square. So the bishop is not really winning the knight. But these are some tactical motives that are in the air. He goes bishop g4. I like this move. His idea now is to pin here. E4 seems like the natural move to stop everything. But no, he goes h3. But does that allow? Oh, his point is if you take e4, then knight takes here. But black has an intermezzo e4. Gukesh has 1 minute 35 seconds to work it out. And this is how it goes. E4, if you take on g4, I take on f3 and I take on c3. But if you take here back on e4, then he's played e4. Let's see what happens. I think Anish must take the pawn with his knight, because if you take the knight, then I can take the bishop. But Gukesh instantly plays bishop f5, pinning here. What amazing play. Knight goes back, he takes the pawn on d5, pawn takes, knight takes back, and now knight c3 is a threat. b5, b4 is also coming in. Black has a wonderful position. Oh, g4 played. Now, calmly you can go back to e6, but there's also a very, very powerful move. You know what that is? Knight c3, attacking the queen, the rook, the knight, all of this. But then when you take back on c3, don't take back the knight because your bishop is hanging here. But instead, after knight c3, knight takes, you put your bishop on d3, the intermezzo. Will Gukesh find it? Oh, he plays knight c3. Seems like he's found it. Anish takes, bishop d3. What a move there by Gukesh. And I think Anish is a bit surprised there. You can look at his face. He does feel something has gone wrong. And now, after bishop c3, you will realize that black has the bishop pair, beautifully placed pieces. b5, b4, a4, b3. The pawns are just running down the board. What is Anish Giri going to do? If Gukesh wins this, the match is going to be equalized and we will go into the sudden death game, which will be so exciting. And Anish now taking a lot of time. Yes, he has the time on the clock, but not so much. He plays queen f3 after a solid 39-second think. Gukesh quickly chops off. Rook b3 played. But the bishop on d3 is defended, so you can just simply move away your bishop from c3. Gukesh plays bishop b4. Ooh, interesting. Maybe something now for Anish to think, because black's moves are very easy to play. He goes knight e4, but that's a mistake because now bishop c2 really attacks this rook. It is kind of trapped, it seems. It also attacks this rook. You can see Gukesh taking his time, takes and plays bishop c2. Fantastic move, attacking b3 and d1. And what is Anish Giri going to do next? Yeah, he's in trouble here. He's in big trouble. He takes the rook, takes back, and I think he'll give a check here. That seems likely that he will play knight f6 check. He does it. King goes back, knight comes up, and Gukesh quickly plays queen e5. He takes on b4 with his rook, but now he's exchanged down. Pawn comes up forward to defend the knight. But guys, now it's all over. Gukesh is an exchange up. He can go bishop b1. He plays it. And Anish is down to 3 seconds. He is lost on time. And you can look at Anish. He's so upset. But clearly Gukesh managed to outplay him. And there you see Anish, being the sport that he is, such a wonderful person, analyzes. The score is now 1-1. We go into the sudden death, and we have a very unique format in this sudden death, because now Gukesh gets 2.5 minutes, Anish gets 3 minutes with 2 seconds increment. Gukesh will have the white pieces. In case of a draw, we have another sudden death. It's not like the Armageddon. The players get up, they look at Wei versus Abdusattorov. In fact, Wei won his game and has moved to the finals. So whoever wins here will take on Wei for the Tata Steel Masters title. But just so that you know, all 4 of them have tied for the first spot, will share the prize money. But this entire playoffs is to determine who will win this tournament. Anish Giri and Gukesh, 1-1 each. A sudden death game, a unique format. The arbiters come in, put Gukesh's play card, then Anish's play card. It's India versus Netherlands there. Very exciting game. In fact, Anish and Gukesh are also pretty good friends of each other. And the game is about to begin. Let's go. Look at the crowd. They're so excited. High stress moments. Let's go. Handshake. D4 played by Gukesh. Knight f6. Knight comes out and d5. G3 played. G6. Ooh, Anish playing the most solid system. Just completely playing symmetrical chess. Will Gukesh play c4, which leads to very solid system. C6. I think Anish has come up with his most solid weapon. Bishop comes out to f5. Bishop b2. The knight is played here. And now what do? As white, he plays his pawn to e3. Pawn comes up to a5. Knight to c3 played. And knight e4. Anish knows his stuff here. Queen comes up. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes. And he puts his bishop in the center. Bishop h3 is a very cool move because after knight d2, you don't want bishops to be traded. And then the bishop f5 comes in. Then the pawn structure is ruined. So he takes it. White has the bishop pair. Black has solidity. This is generally how Anish loves to play. That's also the way in which he beat Gukesh in game number 1. f5. Ooh, slightly weird move there by Anish. And Gukesh plays bishop f1. In fact, for a must-win game, this is a very nice position that Gukesh has got. Knight f6. He wants to get his knight here. But guys, remember the bishops can always drop back here. And then white can start playing on the queen side. That's the way in which things can happen. b4 played. Nice move. Takes. Bishop takes and he moves the rook to f7. And now pawn comes up to a4. If Gukesh manages to sort of get his pawn to a6, he will weaken this c6 pawn here. For the time being, I think Anish can be happy with his position. He's around about even. He also has more time on the clock, roughly a minute. Whoa, g5. What's up, Anish? Why are you playing so aggressively? Now, if ed, there is queen f5. Look at this line. Queen f5, but there is knight e4. Attacking here and the f2 pawn. So maybe you don't want to take that way. But if you play cd, then the problem is the c file opens up for white. So a difficult decision here given by Gukesh for Anish. What will Anish decide? He can take either way. He can also have an intermediate move, g4. So a lot of decisions to make with 3 minutes on the clock. And what is Anish going to decide here? Will he go safe? Will he take here? I think taking here makes a lot of sense because then you have this very strong pawn structure. But he takes with the c pawn. a5, gaining more space. I love the way in which how Gukesh is playing this. It's not a must-win game because a draw means there's another sudden death that will happen. Whoa, what is Anish doing here? He's going for aggression, it seems. He's going to go g4, h4. He's going to go knight e4. This is feeling like Anish is very inspired at this moment. King h7. Now the only problem is that this pawn on h5 could become a weakness in future. Pawn takes, rook takes rook, rook takes pawn. And now Anish either can move his rook away. Oh, but then there is this pawn hanging. But there's the bishop attacked. So a lot of things here to calculate. Both players have roughly a minute and 50 seconds. But Anish is now thinking very deeply. He might go low on time. That's the advantage that he began with 30 extra seconds. But now that seems to have been neutralized. Well, one idea is of course to take queen takes. But the problem is then e6 is very weak. And to defend it is not so easy because bishop controls e7. Well, he's played rook b8. He's played his rook to b8. And his idea is that if you take here, I'm going to take your bishop. So the bishop goes back to a3. Rook comes up to defend the pawn. But I think a very nice move awaits Gukesh where he can attack the rook with bishop c5. And after takes, queen takes, the e6 pawn is hanging. Yes, bishop c5 played. Fantastic. What is Anish going to do next? Well, now he can't move his rook back because that would mean that he will lose this pawn. But if he takes here, then queen takes. And once again, this is hanging. Also, Anish down to 1 minute on the clock. Less than a minute now. So, in this sort of important encounter, Gukesh seems to have gotten the position that he wanted. Look at Anish. He's unhappy with what he's got. Is there a way that he can turn around the position is what he's thinking. But maybe there is nothing much that he can do. He needs to take the rook. He needs to move. He takes, queen takes. And the problem here, guys, is that if queen d7, you have the other bishop moving in. And look at all the squares that these bishops control. And Anish now down to 30 seconds. Well, maybe knight e4, trying to remove this bishop. But then you lose this pawn. He plays knight e4. Queen takes e6. Rook f6. Fantastic move. Only move now is queen e7. There's also queen e5, which can be considered. But look at Gukesh's focus. Man, if I could only have the concentration and confidence of this guy. Just so amazing. Oh, he should have traded the queens. He doesn't trade it. But now, Gukesh can play bishop b4 and then drop his bishop back to e1, controlling the f2 pawn. Yes, finds it. Queen a2 played. Bishop comes back to e1. And now, Anish has to figure a way. He is down to 17 seconds. He has few seconds left. He pushes his pawn to f4. E takes. G takes. And now, this is under pressure from all sides. But how is Gukesh going to deal with it? He plays his bishop to d3. Very cool move. He wants to take this with a check. Rook g6 played. And now Gukesh, I think he will take. Pawn takes. Queen takes e4. And f takes g3. I think Gukesh takes back. Queen a4. But now Gukesh is completely winning. There are many ways. He's pawn up. Actually, 2 pawns up. There's a pin on the rook on g6. He goes rook to c5, attacking the h5 pawn. And it seems that it's over. Gukesh is going to go into the finals. He plays queen d1 to defend the pawn. And here, I think he's lost on time. Anish Giri, you can see there 0-0. Gukesh has won. And he moves to the finals to take on Wei Yi. What a nice display by Gukesh there in the second and third games. And of course, Anish fought his best, but Gukesh goes through to the finals. What an amazing encounter it was, and the rivalry between Gukesh and Anish continues, and we are very excited to see where this heads next.